not suggest the story that we were told. It doesn't make sense to me, and none of the official story makes sense as far as I'm concerned, at every point.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
They made us believe something that was impossible. They had their cameras aimed at the World Trade Center prior to the attacks, and then when the planes hit, they're celebrating. How many people in the United States know this? Why was this not front page of every newspaper in America? I'm a phys ed teacher. The people who are supposed to be doing their job, why aren't they doing? Why do they not talk about what I'm talking about?
That there's something wrong with the picture.
Ever heard of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution? When are we going to get pissed? When are we going to get angry and say, no, this is not acceptable. This is not acceptable. When we look at the whole official story as we were told, does any of it really make sense? Stay with me.
We have a gentleman here who has been dealing seriously with the facts, not theory. By the way, the media will always use the term conspiracy theorists. You'll hear that term all the time. Think about what they're telling us by using conspiracy theorists. What picture are they painting? His Clark Kent job is teaching phys ed in a school, and who, disguised as a mild-mannered teacher in a daily metropolitan school. But one day he had a flash moment. He was visiting a doctor, and he met in the waiting room someone who had been one of the 9/11 first responders there on the spot at the time. And when he was done talking with her, different, never be the same. And ever since then, for 3 years, he's been researching, doing independent research on this, not connected to any party or group or anything. And I think the rest that's worth hearing is hearing, not from me, but from...
We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning.
Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared.
Here's Bush telling the nation on September 11th that he initiated the emergency response plan immediately after the first attack, which we know happened at 8:46. Bush at the time had a 9 o'clock appointment at the Booker Elementary School, right? And if at 8:46, if he did in fact initiate the emergency response plan, then he knew it was an emergency. Why on earth would he go into that classroom, all right? And then of course, at 9:05, when Andrew Card tells him, second plane has hit, America's under attack, he stays in the classroom. What part of America is under attack did he not understand, right? He stayed there for another 7 minutes and continued reading. And then, you brought up Sherlock Holmes before, about the dog that didn't bark. Well, the dog didn't bark that day. Where was the Secret Service, whose only job it is to protect the life of the President of the United States? Wouldn't the President of the United States be a target during a terrorist attack? Shouldn't he have been evacuated immediately? Immediately. No, the dog didn't bark, right? And not only that, but like I said, the safety of those school children that were there, okay? So right away, we have a ton of questions. I got into this, as was mentioned before, in August of 2005. I met a woman named Bonnie Gibfried, who was a 9/11 first responder, an EMT at Flushing Hospital, and she was dispatched to the World Trade Center on the morning of 9/11. And she told me she got there several minutes before 10 o'clock, and they rescued 3 people from the South Tower, brought them back out of the ambulance when she heard boom, a big, huge explosion, and then boom, 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 boom. She said it sounded like a series of cannonballs going off, and that the official story that we were told about what happened in 9/11, of how those buildings came down, how the fire melted the steel and the trusses and they pancaked, was absolute complete nonsense. And anyone who tells you anything different does not know what they're talking about. Told me a couple of other interesting little tidbits, the fact that not a single firefighter was allowed to testify at the 9/11 Commission. And she also told me that the FBI has offices in the World Trade Center and that nobody from the FBI showed up for work that morning, okay? So at that moment, again, 3 years ago, I hate to admit this, folks, I believed the official story. I hate to admit it, for 4 years, I was dumb as a stump. I did believe the official story. I thought we were attacked by, 19 Muslims with box cutters who hate us because of our freedom. I want to start off a little bit with a quote. Let's see if you recognize this quote or know where it came from. Naturally, the common people do not want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor in America, nor for that matter in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy, a fascist dictatorship, a parliament, or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for their lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. Anyone know who that quote is? You got it. April 18th, 1946. You read that quote, doesn't it sound a lot like what's going on in the United States today? The pacifists are denounced for their lack of patriotism, and you're putting the country in danger because you're emboldening the terrorists, and we hear it all the time. I know I've heard it, believe me. We have that in 1946. And of course, we all know what Hitler did in 1933. Most of you probably know that Hitler burned down his own Reichstag building, and shortly thereafter wrote the Enabling Act. When you have a chance to do some research, Google Enabling Act, Patriot Act, and you'll see the similarities are quite striking, all right? Adolf Hitler was aided financially by a traitor in the United States Senate whose name was Prescott Bush, okay? Yes, that's the grandfather of our current president, father of our 41st president, right? Through the Brown Brothers Harriman Bank, okay? So you have that historical precedent. Prescott Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, and George Walker Bush are all members of the Skull and Bones Society. If you're not familiar with that, it's a secret society on the campus of Yale University, and they're really not nice guys, okay? So we have the Reichstag fire, and then Hitler, of course, we know what happened from there on, where he blamed it on the terrorists and, wrote the Enabling Act, took away the people's rights. And if you've been paying attention for the last 7 years, you see the same thing happening right here in the United States of America. And unfortunately, because of the way we think as arrogant Americans, we think that can't happen here. That can't happen in the United States. Folks, it's happening right in front of your eyes. The Patriot Act, the Department of Homeland Security, the Military Commissions Act, I could go on, all right? But we're going to kind of take a look at some of the facts about 9/11. So, who was responsible? From my own opinion, I do not think that George Bush was involved in the planning stages. This is a man who said, it'll take time to restore chaos.
And, it'll take time to restore chaos.
I don't think a man this dumb could possibly be involved in a plan this big, all right? That's my own opinion. I could be wrong, all right? But who was responsible? Well, we know that on September 11th, 1941, they broke ground on the Pentagon. Yes, they did. On September 11th, 1990, George Herbert Walker Bush used the term New World Order for the first time in a speech in front of Congress.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge.
And for those of you who know what the New World Order is, it is the plot to bring about a one-world government and destroy the sovereignty of the United States and every other country on the planet, okay? The reasons for going to the war the first time was set up by a staged event where the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter talked about how Saddam Hussein took the babies out of the incubators and left them on the cold floor to die. It was all staged, and of course we lost a few soldiers then.
They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
One small problem. There never were any incubator baby deaths, not one. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's investigative flagship program, The Fifth Estate, reveals the girl to be the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, given her lines and coached in acting by the giant American PR firm Hill & Knowlton.
And then in the 90s, the Project for the New American Century was formed. Anyone ever heard of the Project for the New American Century, or the PNAC? Okay, we got a few. So, what is the Project for the New American Century? Founded in 1997. This is right from their website, which they took down, by the way. The website was taken down just a couple of months ago. The Project for the New American Century is a nonprofit educational organization dedicated to a few fundamental propositions: that American leadership is good both for America and the world, and that such leadership requires military strength diplomatic entry, and commitment to moral principle. Moral principles. All right, some of the PNAC members include, see if any of these names ring a bell, Jeb Bush, Dick Cheney, Scooter Libby, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, and on and on. In September of 2000, they published this document, Rebuilding America's Defenses, okay? And as you can see, there's the date, September 2000. This is what I like to call the 76-page motive. In this document, without, obviously I can't read it, but they talk about we need to have regime change in Iraq, we need to increase military spending, we need to weaponize space. It's on and on and on. There's just one little problem. It's going to take a long time unless something happens. And on page 51, in their own chilling words, on page 51 of this document, they write, further, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. And they wrote this a year before 9/11, okay? So, one of the other PNAC members, as you see here on the last page, it says Dov Zakheim, System Planning Corporation. And that's a name you're probably not familiar with. Dov Zakheim here's his bio from the Department of Defense website. By the way, this page has also been taken down, but fortunately I printed it out before they took it down. Dov Zakheim was sworn in as the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Defense on May 4th, 2001. Dr. Zakheim has previously served in a number of key positions in government and private business. Most recently, he served as Corporate Vice President of System Planning Corporation. So I decided to do a little Google search and said, well, what does System Planning Corporation do? You're going to love this. This is right from System Planning Corporation's homepage. System Planning Corporation is proud to offer Flight Termination System, a fully redundant turnkey range safety and test system for remote control and flight termination of airborne test vehicles. Coincidence? That the chief financial officer of the Pentagon just happened to work in a company, he was corporate vice president of a company that specialized in the technology of flying aircraft by remote control and terminating flights in midair? That's one hell of a coincidence. Oh wait, it doesn't end there. On September 10th, Donald Rumsfeld, the day before the attacks, announces that $2.3 trillion is missing from the Pentagon.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
You know, it's funny because if 24 hours later, if a couple of planes would hit the World Trade Center, that story would disappear real quick, wouldn't it? And it most certainly did. But not only that, 24 hours, what else gets hit? The Pentagon. You want to know what part of the Pentagon got hit? The accounting offices. The evil Muslims just happened to fly into the accounting offices and destroy all that evidence of the $2.3 trillion missing dollars. Okay? Now, I'd say that's a hell of a coincidence. All right? And so we have Zakheim's involvement, in my opinion. I think that's pretty obvious. We can make a case for that. We must also look at a man named Larry Silverstein. Larry Silverstein purchased the World Trade Center complex several months before 9/11. And late July of 2001, about 7 weeks before, he took out a $3.5 billion insurance policy on the World Trade Center just in case of a terrorist attack. Okay? Silverstein did quite nicely. 9/11 was very beneficial to Larry Silverstein. When the towers went down, he, of course, wanted his money. And this arrogant guy said, I want $7 billion. It was two separate attacks, after all. I think the final settlement was somewhere in the middle. I think he got $5-point-something billion. And of course, also stipulated in the agreement was that he gets to rebuild. Now, for those of you who were talking earlier about the collapse of the buildings, as I told you, my friend Bonnie was there. She heard the bombs, no doubt whatsoever. So let's kind of look a little bit at the scientific evidence of the three buildings. The World Trade Center complex was 7 buildings, and a lot of people don't know that. 1, 2 were the Twin Towers, then there was 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Building 7 was the furthest away from the Twin Towers. A lot of people don't even know that a third building collapsed that day. World Trade Center 7. World Trade Center 7 went down at 5:20 that afternoon, okay? And a lot of people don't even know about it. The World Trade Center, you have 2 massive 110-story buildings that basically turned into dust in about 10 seconds. They went down at approximately free fall speed. When I get to arguments, they're like, it didn't go down to free fall speed. Yeah, okay, give or take a second or two, all right? Think about this for a minute. The plane that hit the North Tower hit at approximately the 90th floor. It was 110 stories high, so you have 20 floors above the impact zone, 90 floors below it. If I do my math right, 20 times 4.5 is 90. So the weight underneath the impact zone was 4.5 times greater than that of the weight above it. It's a 2-to-9 ratio. It's 4.5 times its own weight. Well, if I weighed 200 pounds and I sat on top of a 900-pound horse, would the horse just collapse and turn into dust? No. Those buildings went down to free fall speed. The other day, the guy set the world record in the 100-meter dash, right? 9.6 seconds or something like that. Would he be able to run the 100-meter dash if there was 3 feet of snow on the ground? No. There's resistance. The 90 stories of concrete and steel had to have provided some amount of resistance. Had to. There's no possible way that those buildings could go down at virtually free fall speed. It's not possible. The laws of gravity make that so. An object cannot fall at free fall speed through the path of most resistance. And those buildings went straight through, as we all saw, right through the path of most resistance. The story we were told makes no sense. When we look at the whole official story as we were told, does any of it really make sense? Stay with me. The official story goes something like this. There's a nut in a cave named Osama bin Laden, and he hates us because of our freedom. That was the motive, by the way. Remember? Dick Cheney told us that. George Bush told us that. That was the motive. He hates us because of our freedom.
Why do they hate us? They hate what they see right here in this chamber, a democratically elected government. They hate our freedoms.
Despite the fact that Osama bin Laden worked side by side with our CIA and our government when we were getting the Russians out of Afghanistan, he still hates us, okay? He was able to recruit 19 guys who also hate us, obviously, because of our freedom. And these 19 guys hate us so much they were willing to kill themselves, all right? They boarded the aircraft that morning. All 19 got through with their, even though they were armed with box cutters, we were told, all right? They were able to breach the cockpits on all 4 flights. They were able to kill the pilots and the co-pilots on all 4 flights. They were able to remove the pilots and the co-pilots from their chairs and then take over the cockpits and fly and hit 3 of the 4 targets, all the while outsmarting NORAD and the United States Air Force. Folks, that is the biggest smoking gun of all. We can talk about controlled demolition and the evidence is overwhelming, but the biggest question of all is, where the hell was NORAD? We have, I think most people would agree, we have the greatest military in the world. And in the year prior to 9/11, there were 67 occasions where planes flew off course, and they were all intercepted within 10 to 15 minutes without a problem. We have Air Force bases all up and down the East Coast. Andrews Air Force Base is about 4 miles from the Pentagon. How is it possible that the headquarters of our Department of Defense got hit 35 minutes after 2 hostile aircraft have already hit the World Trade Center? What was going on that morning? Who was in charge? Why were there no aircraft to defend the eastern coast of the United States? Well, it just so happens that on the morning of 9/11, NORAD and Air Force were running a series of war game drills. Operation Northern Vigilance, Operation Vigilant Guardian, Operation Vigilant Warrior. There was about a dozen war game scenarios that were going on that morning, some of which took a great deal of our fighter pilots over Alaska and over Canada, and the rest of those scenarios were doing what? Simulating the exact thing that wound up taking place. Simulating hijacked planes being flown into the World Trade Center. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that Osama bin Laden got that lucky? He got that lucky that here he was planning this massive attack, and he got that lucky. It's incredible. He should have played Mega Millions that day. He would have won that too, obviously, with that kind of luck. Okay? So, we have the NORAD stand down. We have the collapse of the 3 buildings. Most people think it was 2. And then, of course, we look at what happened at the Pentagon and Flight 93. The Pentagon strike happened at about 9:37. To this day, it's been almost 7 years. Has anyone in this room, any American, seen a video of the plane that hit the Pentagon? Nope. We still have not. We saw 5 still frames. It looks like kind of blurry, or then they released a video that looked like a little white blur going into the Pentagon. If you stole a Snickers bar from your local 7-Eleven, there'd be 5 security cameras showing you stealing that Snickers bar, right? We're talking about the Pentagon, the headquarters of our Department of Defense. Security cameras all over the place, and to this day, we still have not seen the video.
From my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual side of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around, which would indicate that the entire plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon and then caused the side to collapse. Now, even though if you look at the pictures of the Pentagon, you see that the floors have all collapsed, that didn't happen immediately. It wasn't until almost about 45 minutes later that the structure was weakened enough that all of the floors collapsed.
You know what? I think probably was not American Airlines Flight 77 that hit that Pentagon. Maybe it was. And if they show me a video and it looks clear to me, then I'll say, okay, I was wrong. And then, of course, we have the story of United Flight 93. We were told that the heroic passengers took over that plane because they knew what was going on in New York and Washington, and, you know, it kind of went to our heart that, you know, there was these heroes on 93. The only problem is that the evidence does not suggest the story that we were told. If you've ever seen video of the so-called crash site in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, there's a hole in the ground that witnesses and news reporters from Fox News said it was about 20 feet by 10 feet, 20 feet wide by 10 feet long.
How big would you say that hole was?
From my estimates, I would guess it was probably about 20 to 15 feet long and probably about 10 feet long or 10 feet wide.
What could you see on the ground, if anything, other than dirt and ash? And
you couldn't see anything. You could just see dirt, ash, and people walking around, broken trees.
We're talking about a 757, folks. A 757 is a big airplane. Where's the wreckage? Anytime a plane crashes, there's wreckage, right? We saw it with TWA Flight 800. They dug 90% of that plane off the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and they put it back together in a hangar. Where's the wreckage? There's no wings, there's no fuselage, no seat cushions, no bodies, no luggage, no nothing.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
But we were told the story. Oh yeah, that's where Flight 93 crashed. It doesn't make sense to me, and none of the official story makes sense as far as I'm concerned. At every point, the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, Flight 93, and getting back to what they brought up in that video that we saw. If this was a colossal failure of intelligence or whatever, how come nobody's been fired? I mean, you know, we make mistakes at work and we're reprimanded or we're fired. We're talking about incompetence that led to the death of 3,000 people. Where's the accountability? Who's been fired? All right. And now let's talk about Osama bin Laden, the main suspect. This is his most wanted page, right from FBI.gov. You can go right to the website and you can pull it up. And here's exactly what it says. Osama bin Laden is wanted in connection with the August 7th, 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. These attacks killed over 200 people. In addition, bin Laden is a suspect in other terrorist attacks around the world. And they also have, he is left-handed and walks with a cane, etc. Okay? There's no mention of 9/11 on here. None. So a couple of years ago, a guy from a website called the Muckraker Report decided to do what I guess all of us should have done. He contacted the FBI, called up their headquarters at 202-324-3000, and he asked the following question. How come there's no mention of 9/11 on Osama bin Laden's most wanted page? And Rex Toome, who's the publicity director for the FBI, answered, the reason why 9/11 is not mentioned on Osama bin Laden's most wanted page is because the FBI has no hard evidence connecting bin Laden to 9/11. Surprised by the ease with which the FBI spokesman made this astonishing statement, I asked, how is that possible? Toome continued, bin Laden has not been formally charged in connection to 9/11. I said, how does that work? Toome continued, the FBI gathers evidence. Once evidence is gathered, it is turned over to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice then decides whether it has enough evidence to present it to a federal grand jury. In the case of the 98 U.S. embassy being bombed, bin Laden has been formally charged and indicted and charged by a grand jury. He has not been formally indicted and charged in connection with 9/11 because the FBI has no hard evidence connecting bin Laden to 9/11. How many people in the United States know this? Why was this not front page of every newspaper in America? That is why I get all my news from the internet, because I don't see any of this stuff on the news at all. I don't see it on CNN, I don't see it on ABC or CBS or any of these. All right, now I have to talk about something that is also an important part, especially for me and my friend Bonnie. The 9/11 first responders. This is right from the EPA's website. You see it's dated September 18, 2001, a week afterwards. Christy Todd Whitman, who was the head of the EPA at the time. It says, EPA Administrator Christy Whitman announced today that results from the agency's air and drinking water monitoring near the World Trade Center and Pentagon disaster sites indicate that these vital resources are safe. We are very encouraged that the results from our monitoring of air quality and drinking water conditions in both New York and near the Pentagon show that the public in these areas is not being exposed to excessive levels of asbestos or other harmful substances, Whitman said. Given the scope of the tragedy from last week, I am glad to reassure the people of New York and Washington, D.C. that the air is safe to breathe and the water is safe to drink. Folks, of all the lies that we were told about 9/11, this is certainly one of the biggest, all right? And I know I'm here to talk about 9/11 and kind of what really happened and, ask questions, but we cannot forget about the first responders, because those people were the people who went into burning buildings when everyone else was running out. And after the towers, those are the people who were digging through that rubble, hoping to find survivors. Those people could have been one of your loved ones. And today we have 40 to 50,000 9/11 first responders who are dying really horrible deaths after they were told, oh, your government, that's your government, folks. This is your government. This is how much you can trust them. Just on this one page, this one paragraph. This is how much you can trust your government. The air is safe to breathe. So far, over 360 9/11 first responders are dead. And there'll be more to come. By the time we get to the 20th anniversary or the 25th, that number will probably be in the tens of thousands. And we were told that the air was safe to breathe. So how does our government treat those heroes? How does our government treat those heroic people? Well, February of this year, Bush had to do his budget for 2009. I got this from Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney's office. Bush budget cuts 9/11 health funding by 77%. $25 million request would cover less than 1/8 of the current needs. Folks, Bush cut the funding. So for fiscal year 2009, those 50,000 or so first responders, here's 25 million. To put that in perspective, 25 million is what we spend in about 6 hours in Iraq, okay? So let's see, money to kill Iraqis, well, we got that plenty. Money to help out the people who, were at the World Trade Center. Here's what Bush told 9/11 first responders. Okay, that's pretty much where Bush stands. And as far as, we were told an official story that there was incompetence and basically it was a failure of intelligence that led to the death of these 3,000 people. So certainly the head of the CIA, he would be reprimanded, fired at the very least, right? Maybe even brought up on charges of treason, right? No. Medal of Freedom. Isn't that like a job well done, right? Let's give them a Medal of Freedom. So it was a failure of intelligence that led to the deaths of 3,000 people. Job well done. So, who was responsible for this? Name names. I think you'd have to look straight at members of the Project for the New American Century. I think key players, first three that come to my mind are Larry Silverstein, Dov Zakheim, and Paul Wolfowitz. Who benefits? That's the most important question that we always have to ask. When something like this, who benefits? On September 11th, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was asked the question, what effect do you think that these attacks will have on U.S.-Israeli relations? And Netanyahu said, oh, it's very good. Well, not good, but yeah, we'll definitely bring about a lot of sympathy for Israel. So I definitely see a connection between the U.S. government, the Mossad, and probably MI5 too. Because if you see how the United States joined forces with Tony Blair and Great Britain in this so-called war on terror, the war on terror, which is an absolute hoax, because if you have 9/11 being a false flag tacked, and this whole war on terror is a hoax. Let me just add a couple other things. A lot of you don't know the story of a man named William Rodriguez. William Rodriguez was in the basement of the World Trade Center on the morning of 9/11. He reported bombs going off in the World Trade Center, in the basement, before the first plane even hit.
And at 8:46 we hear boom! An explosion so hard that pushed us upwards in the air, upwards. And it came out from below us.
One of his friends, Philippe David, got so badly burned that, the skin was hanging off. And so now, of course, William Rodriguez should have ran for his life, but he didn't. He stuck around to help the firemen. He had the master key that helped the firemen get up the stairwells. William Rodriguez was the last man out when the towers went down. He was the last guy that people, they found him hours later in the rubble, and he was the last guy to get out. And he was out of a job, and he was a hero. In fact, so much so that he was invited to the White House. Here he is with President Bush. And of course, the Bush administration wanted him because he's from Puerto Rico, he's a Latino, and there's 30 million Latino votes out there. And they groomed him. They wanted him to run for Congress and all that. The only problem was William Rodriguez is a patriot, and he kept asking questions. He kept asking questions. Yeah, but there were these bombs going off in below me in the basement before the plane even hit. Shut up, Willie. Shut up, Willie. No, but there were these bombs. And Willie wouldn't shut up. And so if you do the research on Willie Rodriguez, you can see DVDs, go to Google Video, watch his presentation. It will really get to you when you hear his story. And so, you have a witness there talking about bombs going off in the World Trade Center before the plane even hit. I have I could talk for about another 5 hours, but I'm going to shut up right now. And I'm going to ask if we could put on Zeitgeist so you can hear from some of the witnesses. I think you have the DVD all set up over there. And then afterwards, we'll have a little Q&A.
Just to follow up on the ending, it ended too soon. Is this intimating that President Kennedy was seeking to reveal some of the undercurrent world situation?
I'm speculating, but I'd say yeah. And I don't know if you noticed that when they showed the picture of his limousine, did you happen to catch the back of the limousine? Notice that there were these two handlebars? Did you notice that? On the back of the trunk of the limo, there are two bars. The limo is specially designed. It had a platform on the back and handlebars for the Secret Service to hold on to as he's riding. You notice there were no Secret Service, and that was taken moments before he was shot. And if you go to YouTube, go search a video called the JFK Assassination Stand Down, and you'll see when he gets off the airplane in Dallas, Texas, and the motorcades form, they're getting in the cars and everything, and the car behind Kennedy, there's an agent pointing to the Secret Service agent who should have been on that platform to offer the president minimal protection. Remember, the job of the Secret Service to protect the life of the president, even to take a bullet. And there's nobody there. And they're pointing to the guy, and he's shrugging his shoulder.
He shrugs his shoulders 3 times in dismay, each shrug more dramatic than the last.
He's being told, get off there, because Kennedy was heading into an ambush. That's a whole other discussion. The warrantless wiretapping, right? Well, you're aware of that. So since 9/11, we have to wiretap your phone calls and read your emails and all that other stuff, which is a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. You have to have probable cause. You have to have a warrant. And Bush has basically said, screw you, I can do whatever I want. And of course, you all know the famous Bush quote in 2000 when he said, if this was a dictatorship, it'd be a heck of a lot easier just so long as I'm the dictator.
If this were a dictatorship, it'd be a heck of a lot easier. Just so long as I'm the dictator.
If you do a little Google search for a document called Transition 2001, here's the cover of it. This is put out by the NSA, the National Security Agency. The NSA, now spying on Americans. And you'll see the date on it. What's the date on it? December 2000. December 2000, folks. That's 9 months before 9/11. So when they have sold you the story, well, since 9/11, we now have to do this, spying you. Been spying since day one, folks, all right? So the wiretapping of your phones and all that was going on long before 9/11. And obviously, it didn't do what it was supposed to do. Did it prevent what happened on 9/11? No. So this whole warrantless wiretapping thing is a bunch of crap, and we shouldn't stand for it. If you're a patriotic American and you care about the United States Constitution, you know, I kind of look at that guy from the movie Network. You've got to get mad.
I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value.
There's got to be some outrage at some point. You know, we've got to, you know, get really upset and angry.
Nice to see you again. Would you comment a little bit about some of the warnings that we had received from other governments beforehand, such as the seizing of, I believe it was Mohammed Atta's laptop in the Philippines and the Project Bojinka information on that, and any other prior warnings?
Well, I think the most obvious warning that comes up, the one that we all know about, is as direct as it could possibly be, and that, of course, is the Presidential Daily Brief of August 6, 2001. In fact, what a coincidence, I just happen to have it right here. And I'll just read just a couple of sentences, and it says, clandestine foreign government and media reports indicate bin Laden since 1997 has wanted to conduct terrorist attacks in the United States. Bin Laden implied in U.S. television interviews in 97-98 that his followers would follow example of World Trade Center bombing and bring the fight into America. After U.S. missile strikes on his base in Afghanistan in 1998, bin Laden told followers he wanted to retaliate in Washington. Later on it says bin Laden wanted to hijack a U.S. aircraft. And then later on it says, FBI information since that time indicates patterns of suspicious activity in this country consistent with preparations for hijackings and other types of attacks, including recent surveillance of federal buildings in New York. So here you have this being presented to Bush. Now here's what's really interesting. And again, this didn't get any media play at all. When this document was declassified in April of 2004, there was a press conference at Fort Hood, Texas, and Bush was asked, this is right from whitehouse.gov, it's right, transcript right from the White House website. Bush was asked, Mr. President, could you tell us, did you see the President's Daily Brief from August of 01 as a warning? Did I see it? Of course I saw it, I asked for it. No, I'm sorry, Mr. President. Did you see it as a warning of hijackers, and how do you respond to that? President answers, my response was exactly like then as it is today, that I asked for the CIA to give me an update on any terrorist threats, and the PDB was no indication of a terrorist threat. I swear to God, I couldn't make this stuff up. Those are his exact words, all right? There was not a time and a place of the attack. That was really inconsiderate of the evil terrorists not to tell us the time of the day that they were going to do this, okay? It said Osama bin Laden had designs on America. Well, I knew that. What I wanted to know was, is there anything specifically going to take place in America that we needed to react to? But the Presidential Daily Brief said nothing about an attack on America. Bin Laden determined to strike in the United States. Washington, New York. So apparently Washington and New York are not part of the United States, according to our president. There was nothing about an attack on America. I mean, come on. It's just crazy, that we still tolerate this guy in the White House. So, anybody else want to add, or?
In as much as 5 or 6 corporations own and operate more than 50% of the media, radio, television, newspapers, etc., would you have to include them in the conspiracy since they can't go to the trouble to do what you and I have done over these last few years?
You could not have said it better. Absolutely they are part of the conspiracy. Not in the sense that they created what happened that day, but absolutely part of the cover-up. Absolutely. That's why I mentioned before that, I get my news from all this stuff that you see, this is what my apartment looks like, by the way. Just stuff all over the place. I mean, this is what I do, because I find all this stuff, and yeah, if I can find it, I'm a phys ed teacher. So why hasn't, the people who are supposed to be doing their job, why do they not talk about what I'm talking about? So absolutely, you're 100% right that the media is absolutely complicit in the cover-up of what happened on 9/11.
First, a quick comment. I think it's totally appropriate that as a phys ed teacher, you're working so hard to blow the whistle. So. You can use that. Secondly, a quick clarification. You've been hearing the term false flag operations. In case any of you don't know what that is, a very historical term for a government or a group faking or instigating or setting up an event to look like someone else did it so that they can then use that for blame. This country has a long history of that. 1898, blowing up the Maine in Havana Harbor so that they could start the Spanish-American War. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, which Johnson used to start the Vietnam War, and there have been many others. So that's what false flag operations are.
While you're on that subject, remember the Maine. And of course, it was William Randolph Hearst who was a big propagandist to promote that whole thing and get us into the Spanish-American War. And of course, if you know that there's a book out now, it's called Debunking 9/11 Myths. All right? And it basically tries to squash people like me and, the millions of people who know what we know. And it's very interesting that the book was written by Popular Mechanics. Popular Mechanics is owned by the Hearst Corporation. William Randolph Hearst, of course, is known as the father of yellow journalism, and the president of the Hearst Corporation is a woman by the name of Kathleen Black. Kathleen Black is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and the CFR, the good folks that are bringing you the New World Order. By the way, Barack Obama and John McCain are both members of the CFR, so don't get your hopes up.
Just a quick question. Could you, as we talked before, could you mention to them the interesting little bit about the stock trades at the time?
Yes. Okay. Just in the days prior to 9/11, there were several massive amounts of short selling of the stocks in United Airlines and American Airlines. Not the airline industry as a whole, just those two specific airlines. An insane amount of what the normal daily short selling, if you know what stock market is, when you're betting that the price of a stock is going to go down. So you would think that our government would certainly investigate that, right? Investigate it and well, who made money off this? Once again, who benefits? That's always the major question you've got to ask. And of course, there was no mention of it. And somewhere I have page 172. You saw Ed Begley Jr. before speaking about, on page 172 of the 9/11 Commission report, they talked about it, and they basically said, well, who financed 9/11 is of little. Ultimately, the question is of little practical significance. Who financed 9/11 is of little practical significance. 3,000 dead people, and who financed is really not that important. And who made money off it in the case of the stock trades, and it's criminal.
I have, I think, a couple of questions. One is, do you think it's maybe a little disingenuous to even talk about the warnings about terrorism and all that other kind of stuff when, if this is an inside job of sorts, Osama bin Laden is really kind of a bit of a straw man, don't you think?
Yeah, that's
a good point. And I did see one press release, I can't remember where it was, but I think I have a copy of it at home, from Osama bin Laden himself, a statement after the 9/11 thing, disavowing any involvement with that. And that was never really made public. Do you have it? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about.
CNN.com, September 17, 2001. Yeah, this is important. By the way, that's an excellent point, because the whole thing with Bush's presidential daily brief, in my opinion, it was a plant. So that even after the attacks, they could say, yeah, it was bin Laden. I think that was all just a plant. So that's a good point that you brought that up. This is from CNN.com, September 17, 2001. Bin Laden says he was not behind the attacks. It says, Islamic militant leader Osama bin Laden, the man the United States considers a prime suspect in last week's terrorist attacks on New York and Washington, denied any role Sunday in the actions believed to have killed thousands. In a statement issued to the Arabic satellite channel Al Jazeera, based in Qatar, bin Laden said, the United States government has consistently blamed me for being behind every occasion its enemies attacks it. I would like to assure the world that I did not plan the recent attacks, which seem to have been planned by people for personal reasons. I have been living in the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and following its leader's rules. The current leader does not allow me to exercise such operations, bin Laden said. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I had it and I meant to mention it. So yeah, good point.
One more question. Could you address the presence of Marvin Bush in the security department of the World Trade?
Okay. Marvin Bush was a principal in a company called Securicom, which later changed its name to Stratosec. And they were in Marvin Bush and Wirt Walker. So George Bush's brother and George Bush's cousin were in charge of the company that was in charge of security at the World Trade Center just prior to 9/11. Now I'm going to throw something at you. I think that's a red herring. My own opinion is that Silverstein. And if you do a little research on a company called Urban Moving Systems, which seemed to have a lot of Israelis that were involved, and they might have been more apt to have been the ones that put the bombs in the buildings. And I think that the Marvin Bush thing is probably a red herring.
Is that true?
It is true. Oh, it is true, yeah. But Marvin Bush and Walker were in charge of a company that was in charge of security. It's a hell of a coincidence. But I still point the finger at Silverstein because he, again, had the most to gain.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
And if you also know the story of, while we're on that, on 9/11, 5 men were actually arrested. They were given the nickname the Dancing Israelis. Okay, and I have to mention this because, and here's the article from, I think it says the Record. I think it's the Bergen Record, and the headline says 5 men detained as suspect conspirators were driving similar van as 3 seen celebrating after the attack. And what happened was there was these guys who were celebrating, and they later said that. Hang on a second, let me get the exact quote so I don't misstate it. All right, here it is. The 5 dancing Israelis arrested on 9/11. A Mossad surveillance team made quite a public spectacle of themselves on 9/11. The New York Times reported Thursday that a group of 5 men had set up video cameras aimed at the Twin Towers prior to the attack on Tuesday and were seen congratulating one another afterwards. These guys were arrested and released. Why?
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document the event.
They had their cameras aimed at the World Trade Center prior to the attacks, and then when the planes hit, they're celebrating? And they're arrested, rightfully so, I think, and released? Yes.
I don't know how many people know that the New York City judge who released them and who confiscated that case was Michael Mukasey.
Can we continue with that subject? All right, good, let's do it. All right. I'm going to bring this up, and first off, let me state very clearly so no one misunderstands me. I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm not a racist. If I say that I think the United States government might be behind 9/11, I'm not anti-American. I'm simply pointing out what I think. And to look at certain things. For example, let's just say that there were people in key elements of our government that were dual citizens of the United States and France, or the United States and Canada, or the United States and Mexico. We'd probably be pretty outraged, right? We'd say, well, where are their loyalties? How can you be a dual citizen of 2 countries? Where are your loyalties? To which country are your loyalties? Well, it's funny you mentioned Michael Mukasey, because Michael Mukasey, along with, you ready? Michael Chertoff, Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Larry Franklin, Douglas Feith, Edward Lutwig, Henry Kissinger, Dov Zakheim, Kenneth Altman, Scooter Libby, Robert Sadeloff, Elliot Abrams, Mark Grossman, Richard Haas, Robert Zoellick, Ari Fleischer, James Schlesinger, David Frum, Joshua Bolton, John Bolton, David Wuersma, Elliot Cohen, Mel Sembler, Steve Goldsmith, Adam Goldman, Joseph Gildenhorn, Christopher Gersten, Mark Weinberger, Samuel Bodman, Bonnie Cohen, Ruth Davis, Daniel Kurtzer, Cliff Sobel, Stuart Bernstein, Nancy Brinker, Ron Weiser, Mel Sembler, Martin Silverstein, Lincoln Bloomfield, Jay Lefkowitz, Ken Melman, and Brad Blakeman. I didn't give their titles and all their positions because it would take too long. All dual citizens of the United States and Israel. Where are the loyals? And not, I'm glad you said it, and Larry, even though he doesn't work for our government, and Larry Silverstein, yes, who made a few $1 billion off of the collapse of those buildings. So, I'm not being anything. I'm not being, I'm just stating this as a fact, all right? And I say, yeah, we have to ask that question. We have to have that dialogue. And I'm going to bring it up, whether anyone likes it or not. On June 8th, 1967, Israeli forces murdered 34 of our U.S. sailors aboard the USS Liberty during the Six-Day War. No one was held accountable. Lyndon Johnson covered it up. I just thought I'd throw that out there. Go ahead.
Who was Larry Silverstein?
Larry Silverstein was the man who bought up the World Trade Center complex in the months prior to 9/11 and took out the huge insurance policy and made billions off of the collapse of those 3 buildings. And World Trade Center 7 has already been rebuilt. It's already been rebuilt, and of course there's talks they're going to build this Freedom Tower, and and it was brought up. Just one other thing to mention: it was brought up in that video that you saw earlier. Here is the BBC report. They kind of went through quick. Hijacked suspects alive and well. This is from September 23rd, 2001, 12 days after the attacks. So Waleed al-Shahiri is protesting his innocence, and Muhammad, if you go to Google The Guardian, Muhammad Atta's father allegedly said that Muhammad Atta called him on September 12th to tell him he was okay. And it's also very interesting that, we say, but we saw him get on the plane. We saw that surveillance video. No, you didn't. The video you saw of Muhammad Atta was him getting on in Portland, Maine. Remember, they said that the plane took off from Portland, Maine, went to Boston Logan Airport. And the surveillance video we have is of him in Portland. We never saw any video of him getting on in Boston. And this was the great story. Newsday last year, if you saw the article, Newsday published an article where they talked about, it was the untold story of 9/11. And they had, they found Muhammad Atta's bag in a rental car or something, and of course the bag just happened to have, a Quran and a flight manual how to fly and all this kind of stuff, all this incriminating evidence. So my question would then be, why would a guy on a suicide mission pack a bag? Why is a guy who's going to kill himself? I need to pack before I kill myself, all right? And so then he gets in the rental car, and he just happens to leave it all behind. It just and it has, of course, all this incriminating evidence with the Quran and how he hates America. Oh, come on. I mean, how dumb do they think we are? Just like before when you saw the thing about the passport, they found, I think it was Saddam al-Suqami's passport. Everything was incinerated in a millisecond, but a passport made of that durable material known as paper somehow survived that fireball. Okay, yeah, I'm stupid. And this is what they do. They made us believe something that was impossible. And then they threw it. It was almost like they were teasing with us. Let's tell them we found a passport. Let's see if they believe in America. They found the passport. And the guy left the bag behind with the Quran. See, he was evil behind. And you saw that picture of Atta, and he just looks like pure evil, doesn't he? Sorry, go ahead.
Can I ask you to speculate on something for a minute? Sure. We see all this picture that there's something wrong with the picture, and we see all the pieces of complicity between American government, forces, people behind the scenes in other countries, and various players that are involved in it. But pull the camera lens back for a minute and say, well, what could possibly be the overall motivation of this?
What's the end game?
Yeah, the end game. United States involvement in the Middle East?
No, that's not the end. That's the road to get to the end game.
Okay.
And I think the end game is just what George Herbert Walker Bush talked about on September 11th, 1990. I think the goal is to bring about the New World Order. Let me just. This is a quote from the Council on Foreign Relations Journal from 1974. This is how long this stuff's been going on. The New World Order will be built, an end run on national sovereignty. Eroding it piece by piece will accomplish much more than an old-fashioned frontal assault. And I think that's where we're headed. If you've ever read some of the David Rockefeller quotes, I mean, he talked, I think, in 1996 about how eventually people are going to, beg for the New World Order. And he said something like, all it'll take is the right crisis to bring this about. And I think the right crisis is the war on terror. I mean, look at how many Americans, how many people you know, your friends, your family, have basically said it's okay. They're willing to, give up their liberty for so-called security, And it's okay that, you go to the airport and they're practically, strip searching you and, oh, it's okay that I have nothing to hide, right? They can listen to my phone calls and they can read my emails. I have nothing to hide, Yeah. I brought this T-shirt along to show you, because this happened right here on Long Island. If you've never seen this shirt before. All right? And on the back, it says enough. All right? And there was a man who, a few months ago, was an 80-year-old deacon, and he was arrested at, I think it was the Walt Whitman Mall? Smith Haven Mall. I apologize. Smith Haven Mall. And he was arrested for wearing... Folks, this is the United States of America. Getting arrested for... An 80-year-old man getting arrested for wearing a T-shirt. Ever heard of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution? When are we going to get pissed? When are we going to get angry and say, no, this is not acceptable. This is not acceptable. And of course, he eventually... That's not the point. Arrested for wearing a T-shirt? We see it happening all the time. We saw Cindy Sheehan get arrested a couple of years ago for wearing a T-shirt. Where? In the House of Representatives. Okay? She had a T-shirt that had the number of dead soldiers. She was fine. She passed through clearance. She was invited by a congressperson. She took off her sweat top. It had the number of dead soldiers. They took her out in handcuffs. And 20 minutes later, Bush said, freedom's on the march. He was marching right out of the House of Representatives. All right? You all know the story about, I think the kid's name was Andrew Meyer, the kid, Don't Tase Me, Bro. Remember down in the University of Florida, they were having a forum, and he asked John Kerry a question. He asked him a few questions. He said, why did you concede the 2004 election when there was so much evidence of voter fraud? Why don't you impeach Bush before he invades Iran? And, oh, by the way, aren't you a member of Skull and Bones? By the way, Bush and Kerry are ninth cousins, twice removed, okay? And they're both members of Skull and Bones. Same three questions I would have asked if I had ever been able to confront John Kerry.
We're both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go on.
I'm sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, a secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets.
And as soon as he brought up Skull and Bones, he was grabbed by 5 police officers, thrown down to, and he's like, what are you doing? Get off me, get off me. And, you can see the video on YouTube. And they threw him onto the ground. He was handcuffed and tasered. Tasering is a form of torture. And that's the other thing. Now torture's okay in the United States. We have always, we meaning Americans, we always had the moral high ground, right? When Saddam Hussein was torturing people, that bastard, he's torturing people. Now it's like we're doing it. Oh, but when we do it, it's okay. We just took the sign at Abu Ghraib and put it, under new management. That's basically what we did.